When my girls were younger, we had one of these toys in the house, and perhaps it looks familiar to you as well. The goal is to align each of these blocks with their particular shape and get them to drop through into the inside. And I remember watching my girls as they would work to line up the shape, and they had to get it just right. So they would get it close, and sometimes it would take a little more effort to where it would eventually fall through, and we'd have success. And as I was working on this lecture, this toy came to mind because it's this idea of matching the right block with the correct opening in order to have that goal met. And as teachers, we have a lot of tools that we can use, and it's about trying to decide what are the best ones to help our students reach those learning outcomes. So in this video, by the end of it, you will be able to describe examples of various course formats, major teaching methods, and teaching moves. You'll be able to provide suggestions of teaching methods for specific learning outcomes that would enhance your students' academic achievement. And finally, you'll eventually be able to select and justify appropriate teaching strategies to support those learning outcomes in a proposed course. The book has this figure, and I think it does a nice job of summarizing this idea that selecting the appropriate teaching methods or learning experiences should be done or informed by the learning outcomes that you've set. So you've identified what these are. That should inform what teaching methods you select, which should then improve how students do on any type of performance assessment, whether it be a test, an essay, a project, field notes, a lab report, and so on. So as instructors, we've determined these before we think about our teaching methods. And then eventually we'll have to identify what are those performance assessments. But hopefully those are being informed because students are able to practice that here at this stage. So these things all connect to provide a good learning experience through your course development. So let's dive right into the types of teaching tools. The textbook does a great job of describing these in more detail, so we're really going to hit the high notes. For course formats, there are a number of ways your course could be scheduled and taught. So this could involve lecture meetings only, where you bring in, could be up to 100, 200, 300, or less, and then you're just lecturing. You're in that room and you lecture. Then there's a format where you might lecture once a week, and then they break out into recitation or discussion sections that are smaller. We also have those with laboratories. We see that a lot with the bench sciences, where you'd have a biology or a chemistry lecture, and then you'd have a weekly lab. There's lecture meetings with skill activity sessions, where they get to practice what they're doing, breaking it again into smaller groups. Then maybe there's more of a discussion meeting where it's mainly discussion based with some lecture or with some skill sessions. This is how I probably would address, or this one, my web design course, where I had to lecture, but then they also had the ability to work on their computers. There's some that are skill activity sessions alone. I'm thinking about like architecture drawing labs, where they're practicing that skill. And I use the word lab, but I think you know what I mean, where they're just working on their projects. There's also seminars. We often see this, especially at the graduate level, where you have a smaller group of people who the students are in charge of a weekly discussion and it rotates. The book doesn't address this, but I wanted to note that two other popular formats would be online only, and that could be a synchronous online course where students are expected to log in and be together at a particular point in time, or asynchronous, such as how I'm teaching this course, where there's no required online time component, and everyone is online at their own pace. There's also hybrid. We had to do this a few years ago where we had half of the students online, half were in person, and then it would switch during the next class day. And hybrid is still a popular way to maximize enrollment and capacity. I know of several speech courses that are taught this way, where students will log in for an online component and then come on campus to deliver their speeches in front of a real audience. So those are various course formats. As you're designing a course, you need to consider what format works best. Sometimes it's just what format do you need to offer the course in. Then we move into teaching methods. So teaching methods are more of the multi-week assignments or in-class activities that are going to take more than one class period. And so as you reflect upon your own college experience, and even now if you're teaching, there's probably various teaching methods you're aware of that you've seen, perhaps some that you prefer. So in the book, it goes into detail, well, not detail, some of these are going to be explained more in subsequent chapters, but it introduces these major teaching methods. And some of these are things that make sense for the discipline or the context. Others might just be more familiar to you based upon your collegiate experience. Some of them are perhaps a bit of a stretch. So for example, I use service learning in my course, but I also do a lot of lecturing, and we have writing exercises. We do a little bit of group work. So I'm picking from a few things that help me help the students achieve their learning outcomes. So you're not limited to one of these teaching methods, but these are things that you can use. And again, we're going to discuss these in subsequent lectures to share best practices. I also wanted to note that the textbook has some great resources in the form of tables that begin to help you connect these methods for student learning outcomes. So when you have a moment, review those and think about what that could mean for your own course development. The final piece in this course format, teaching methods, and then teaching moves are these. And these are more what you could accomplish in a class session. So these are learning to learn strategies you share with your course. These are short in-class activities or exercises. These might be discussion questions you ask them to contemplate. So again, these are embedded within those teaching methods. And in a particular class, you might have 2 or 3 of these to keep students engaged and to reinforce what you're teaching them. So these mini methods comprise less time and commitment. And as I mentioned, you can use several in a class period. As you're considering how you might want to evaluate students, you should give them opportunities to practice those through these teaching moves. So it's really important for me in my writing intensive class that students can provide peer feedback. So I will build in practice activities for them to practice editing. And at first, we don't edit anything written by anyone in the class so that they feel a little more free to mark things wrong. And then we switch into editing things for the people in the class. But I want them to practice that because eventually they'll be assessed on how well they can write, and they need to be able to recognize those areas of improvement. This is also one of those areas that by the second time you teach a class, even the third, you'll have a better sense of what you can fit in due to timing. How long does it take students to actually complete some of these in-class activities and exercises? So I just want to give you that grace that the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, and it may take a few iterations for you to feel more comfortable with what you can actually accomplish within a class session. But it's always good to be prepared. All right, that brings us to our second discussion post topic for this module, and that is helping you start to align these elements of connecting your learning goals or outcomes with various assessment and learning activities. So the assessments could be considered those teaching moves. What are things that you might be able to do in a class session that would help students practice? So on page 171 in the textbook, there is this 3-column tool. And what I'd like you to do for the discussion post is to identify 3 learning goals or outcomes you have for the course you're developing. So let's think about that syllabus assignment and what course you're planning to create. And for each one, provide at least 1 assessment suggestion and 1 learning activity. So what could they do here to help them do well on the assessment? So again, the textbook has a great example. When you provide your response, you can use a bulleted list, or you should be able to insert a table into your response, and that will help align these elements. So in review, course formats are the big picture. That's how you're going to frame the whole class period, whether it be a lecture, a lab, a seminar. You're going to do a lecture and a bit of discussion, a lecture and a bit of skills practice. It's that whole class period, and it may comprise most of the class periods during that course's offering, so over a semester or term. The teaching methods are integrated within that course format. So you'll see lecture listed on both of these. You'll see discussion listed on both of these. But it's starting to think a little bit more critically about what are the best methods to use and following some best practices. Finally, the teaching moves are how you're going to explain the material. So is that going to be a really brief lecture and an activity? Are you going to have them work on a skill and turn in a worksheet by the end? So on and so forth. This is where you get to be really creative as a teacher. So instructors should use those learning outcomes to inform what teaching methods and moves they're going to use to ensure an effective learning experience for their students.